All right. So I've seen a number of tier lists for Coheed and Cambria, and I thought, hey, these are very enjoyable. Thought I wanted to put in my 2 cents. In fact, I created the tier list with every Coheed and Cambria song that I'm also going to do after this. My idea is to do the tier list before I rate every song, and then I'm going to take a look at which album has the most like S tier songs, and then I'm going to come back and see if my album rating made sense. Now, I've been a fan of Coheed and Cambria for boy over 15 years now. Seen them in concert um, half dozen times, a number of times with my wife, and recently just saw them with my 6-year-old. So it's kind of a big deal. I have all the comics. I have, or most of the comics, I should say. I got most of the deluxe box sets. I think it's a pretty amazing band. I like a variety of types of music, but what really draws me to Coheed and Cambria is the dichotomy between the lyrics and the vocal sort of tone and the musical sort of genre that it goes with. A lot of times when you listen to metal, you get pretty much the same sort of vocal, which is more of a loud growl, and that kind of matches the heaviness of it, and with lyrics that are sort of upsetting and hardcore, edgy, whatever you want to call it. Then you get pop music that's always kind of upbeat, and the music's not much. It's not very heavy, and you get vocals that also aren't very heavy, that are usually upbeat, and the music is very like emotional, very relationship oriented, and pretty predictable. Um, and both pop music and metal can be relatively structured and predictable. So I also prefer bands that kind of go their own way and kind of change things up. So again, with Coheed and Cambria, you have sort of these poppy vocals that are distinct with sort of self harmony and variation that is contrasted with sort of a heavier style background. It's certainly a variety of genres with the style that they're going for. So sometimes it could be sort of heavy with sort of a bouncy sound in the back, or a bouncy fun sound, or it could be like heavy instrumentals with the most brightest vocals you could have. I also love the lyrics being not that it's created like linked to a concept necessarily. I think that's cool and all. And as an artist myself, I find it interesting that they do that. However, it's more about like the lyrics and the complexity of the lyrics and how they could mean multiple things as far as the band personally, as well as what the story is for the comics. And I think that's also particularly cool, especially when the vocals are sort of upbeat, poppy, and then but they're singing about something sort of horrific and like I said, dark and edgy. So love to see the contrast there. And so yeah, they're a huge fan of the band. And as I said, 15 years, I've listened to all these albums way, way, way too much. Well, I guess you can't listen to them too much. Now, as far as the tiers go, I think a lot of them say, for me, they're all pretty good albums in comparison with other music because of the reasons that I just stated. So if it's a D, that doesn't mean it's like a D for all music, for all genres. It's just maybe a D in relationship to the tier that I have here. Some of these also are a little bit predictable. I've noticed where it's just the same group in S as is D. I think mine will actually probably be a little predictable as well, especially if you're an older fan. Obviously, you'll have more favoritism to some of their older stuff. Anyway, let's take a look here and start in no particular order here. Let's do the color before the sun. I just I'm feeling C now. Look, it starts with color, right? And color C. This album has, to me, it's a little short. It's a little too short. Like if it had a few more songs, I don't care about the concept, to be perfectly honest. That's secondary. And the fact that people would be like upset that it doesn't have a concept is a little strange because a lot of the songs, all you had to do was say, oh yeah, that was, Josephine singing that, or that was about, some, some murder of some person, and be like, oh, and then they're in the stars now and singing together in the, among the fence or something. I feel like you could easily interpret it that way if you wanted to. And the truth is, there's a few songs in here that have some callbacks to the concept in a way, like the audience with the, they're burning stars. And I feel like a time consumer can be found in Here to Mars, at least the little, little guitar riff that they got going on there in the background. I believe during the bridge of Here to Mars, and they do that a lot where they'll have this sort of thematic sort of instrumental piece that you'll see throughout their discography, and sort of references to things like "Welcome Home" being sort of like going to your death in some ways, or calls to your mother, and babies. And things like that. You see these sort of themes that repeat throughout the discography, and sometimes you'll see even songs repeated and parts of songs and other songs. And it was really cool that the last album did that sort of thing, which was a pleasant surprise to see them kind of considering those themes. Anyway, yeah, so let's just put it there in the C category now. Second Stage Turbine Blade. Oh boy, I think I'm starting at the wrong spot. I might have to move these around a little bit. I haven't really thought of this at all. So like I said, I'm going to come back here after I rate every song, because I think it's hard to rate the whole album, because there are parts of Second Stage Turbine Blade that I love, but there are other songs that I'm like, I could do without, or sort of the sound of it that's a little more. It's hard to rate this at such a high level when it seems almost like garage metal. It seems very raw, and then you can say, well, the production is bad. So depending on how you're rating the album could really determine its location. So if you're talking about production value, well then sure, this would probably be the worst. So I had come from Good Apollo Volume 1, Volume 2, In Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth, and I had just started listening to Year of the Black Rainbow when I first discovered Second Stage Turbine Blade. And when I first heard it, again, it had sort of like it was not super appealing with the vocals, and I'm not a huge fan of the punk, and the vocals were so, I would call it yelly, like he was yelling a lot in them. And it was interesting because I was working in the game industry at the time as a visual effects artist, and among other things, and I was listening to, while I was creating the artwork, I was listening to, going back and forth between and keep Second Stage Turbine Blade and Year of the Black Rainbow. And they were such polar opposites. It was just so bizarre to go from one song to the other. And so both of them, they took a lot of sort of getting used to, but that definitely were the background music for my life at that time, which was super interesting. And so a few of the songs just really stand out as fantastic, and then a couple others a little bit too perhaps yelly for my taste. And as I said, we'll get into track by track next time, but for now I think keeping in this slot probably a good place at the moment. So I'm Burning Star 4, Good Apollo Volume 1, and I think this one, of course, has Welcome Home on it, which I think influenced a lot of people to get involved. I think a lot of people or fans are a little harsh on Welcome Home, and I think it has to be considered that this was a lot of the introduction to the dichotomy with Claudio's vocals for what he's singing about, and then the sort of the heavier instruments and the metal sort of sound of that. So I think this has, there's a lot to be said for that song, even though it's not the most progressive song, and it may not be their heaviest song, it may not be their most vocally interesting song. In fact, I've heard people mention the chorus. I don't know where the chorus is in Welcome Home. But as an album as a whole, this album could be a little bit, I would say, a little bit repetitive. I don't think it has nearly the variety genre-wise or vocal-wise that some of the other ones do. But at the same time, it's probably the best. For me, it's the best production, and it seems like it's the most consistently good. And like every song is just incredible. So I really love that one. I'll keep that up in the S tier. In fact, I think it's pretty much a perfect album, maybe just a little variation in it. Year of the Black Rainbow. So that's going to definitely have to be down here in the, I kind of wish, in fact, I think this one probably destroyed their career, I want to say. It might have hit the charts initially, and they might have gotten some awards and stuff and some popularity off of it. But I think after that initial hit, it's kind of like a video game that has a lot of hype. Everyone wants to buy it, and then once they buy it, they're like, okay, well, I don't want to see anymore. I think this was probably around the time that everyone started falling off. And I find it interesting that no one really mentions why that's the case, when to me it's super, super obvious. And it's clear it's just because Claudio broke his voice. In fact, in a Prize Fighter song, I forget what the name of it is, but he mentions breaking your voice. And around this time, he wanted, I think it was a Prize Fighter EP. And his voice just sounds like The tone is strange. It's a little bit off tune at some points, in sort of a cool way. I would say it's like it's deliberately hitting these sort of flat notes in interesting ways, and he's got the sort of a mixed vibrato from No World of Tomorrow, but then he's got just the yelling, and his whole tone is much lower as a whole. But he's screaming so much. I imagine that if he was losing his voice, this probably made it worse because he was probably to compensate by doing more like screamings and stuff that that may have caused even more damage. So continuing that, there are definitely some amazing songs on here. I'm a big fan of Juggernaut and When Skeletons Live, and Guns of Summer, really like that. And Broken, of course, is very progressive and interesting songs. I think that's a good album. It's just definitely, it doesn't even feel like a Coheed and Cambria song because it doesn't have the sort of fun and uplifting vocals that I expect with the tone that I want. So No World of Tomorrow, I think I'm really not a big fan of this one either. I feel like it was like kind of like if there's an arc, this is like going down towards Year of the Black Rainbow. So Good Apollo Volume 2. Boy, I remember when I first heard this thinking how much different it was than Good Apollo Volume 1, and kind of being like, oh boy, I don't know if this is working for me. Kind of the way he was saying like baby was sort of had this weird vibrato to it, and some of the lyrics just seemed like they were cheesier and less like I know they were still kind of dark, but it seemed like there was just a little bit too much cheesiness involved in that, and some of the songs. But I got used to it, and they started to become like really almost addictive in their catchiness. Like this is where maybe it started my well, I always sort of had, I would call it a hate-love relationship with Coheed and Cambria, where I started off when I listened to them, I thought they were every album that I first listened to, I'm like, oh boy, this is the worst one. This is not good. I'm like, even the Good Apollo 1, it just felt like there was this term called pussy rock that I don't know if that was an actual term or not, but I would call it that. It was on the radio. I would hear this sort of, I don't know, alternative rock or light rock, would have like sort of high male vocals that just again, it wasn't like I don't really have any sort of problem with that. I just didn't really care for it. I thought it was like trying to be rock, but it wasn't. But it was never like hard enough or edgy enough. But then the songs here, I kept listening to them through Rock Band and just other bits that would come on. I'd be like, oh boy, I really want to hear that song again. And I'm like, what's going on here? Why do I like this? And then as I listened to it, what really clicked for me was I kind of got that again, the dichotomy of like, whoa, this is really cool. Like the music, the musicians and the musicianship and the instrumentals are so intense. The lyrics are so edgy, and oh wow, it's got a sci-fi concept behind this, and then the vocals just I started to appreciate the vocals and all he was doing with the self harmonies and the range that he was getting, and it just started to become more and more liked. I might have to move this one. I'm not sure. I have to think about it here because there's some awesome songs like the Incomplete. A lot of people don't like the Radio Bye Bye. I think that song is, when I first heard that song, I'm like, whoa, this one really feels like a Volume 1 song. So that one stood out for me as one I really liked. And then the Incomplete itself was amazing. Road to the Dam. Those songs were really great. It was like maybe that first half that I just wasn't digging at the time. So maybe I'll come back to that one. This one here, it feels like it's probably an A or S for In Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth 3. Again, this was one I listened to that was just like, it sounded like his vocals were very clean. So coming from Good Apollo Volume 1 or comparing the two, I was thinking this one was a little bit too clean for me. But then again, the songs were so incredibly catchy, and this is one of the most progressive albums. It's got a lot going on with 2113 and of course a favorite House Atlantic. That was one that I had heard on the radio that I just really, I had remembered that song. I'm like, oh boy, this is not it seemed like that was sort of that pop song that I didn't care for. However, in the context of the album, when it came on, I didn't even quite make the association with the radio. It's just in that context of that like collection of songs, it was such a nice relief, and it was really great. The vocals being high like that, it was just so much fun right there. And then I love the way the lyrics were just so like violent and terrifying. It was like, it's just a very fun song. And of course, the tongue-in-cheek video helped with that, to get sort of an idea of how the band sort of was approaching things stylistically and stuff. Okay, so then we can, I guess, move on here. Yeah, I got a little bit off order here, so maybe that's not the best thing. Afterman Ascension. maybe here, and then Descension. These guys, I know a lot of times people can't make a decision between them. Ascension, it was such a great. I was so excited when I heard Domino uh, after Year of the Black Rainbow. That was the first single that they released. I was like, oh yeah, they're back. His vocals were a little more like in Volume One. You could hear it coming out again, and the progressive nature of the song, the variety there, and it was kind of they had some fun moments and stuff. It was just a lot really cool. And then the Afterman having the guts to sort of go like completely um, light in the vocals throughout the entire song was cool. And then Hollywood the Cracked, I loved hearing the um, second stage Turbine Blade. I loved hearing the tone of his voice just shine in Hollywood the Cracked, while it had sort of that edginess of Al the Killer. I think that was super cool, and that to hear that. A lot of people liked Vic the Butcher. That one I didn't really care for. It seemed like I didn't care for the chanting at the end. That wasn't I wasn't a huge fan of that. But Evagria the Faithful, I don't really know how to say that name, but that song was that coming right after that was just so great. The catchy vocals and then Subtraction. I really didn't care for like Pearl of the Stars, the way it had that low vocal, but it worked very well with Subtraction, I thought, because he had these sort of like harmonies that he did with the high pitch and the low pitch, and it was such a contrast to some of the other songs before it. And then Homecoming had that sort of wake up kind of piercing vocal that he has, that I like, sort of that accent that he does with his vocal when it's just him sort of singing very raw sounding. So that was cool. Dissension, though, has one of my favorite songs, with Two is my favorite one. Again, that sort of poppy, fun sound, but it's a very sort of somber kind of song. Was it Century the Defiant? That the first one with the intro is just so good that to hear that, and I feel like that just outdoes Domino those first couple tracks. And Number City, I loved the sort of upbeat feel of that, and then it just jumps right into the contrast with that being so hard and edgy with Gravity's Union. But then you had a couple of weird sort of softer songs there, Dark Side of Me and Iron Fist, and that I know it seems to be generally the case that there's like this lull down there in the middle of the album. I don't think they're bad songs. I just they're not some of my favorites. And then we had a big gap there for a while. And then we had Unheavenly Creatures, and again, I'm just kind of throwing these around. I'm not 100% sure this is why I want to go with it. But Unheavenly Creatures was, phenomenal. I love the length of it, and people complain about the length, but I'm like, no, man. If there's too many Coheed songs, I can just skip them. I don't mind that. It does not bother me if they have a ton of songs. It just gives me more options, which I love. So for me, I listen to the whole album, and then I jump over to the demo and listen to all the demos. You got sort of that rawness of Color Before the Sun with the demo versions of these songs. Because when I first heard this, I'm like, oh wow, this is way overproduced compared to Color Before the Sun. So actually, at first, I didn't care for it as much. But then I heard the demos. I'm like, oh yeah, he's still got his raw vocals in there, and that like up that. And I started listening to the produced album a lot more, and I thought, boy, man, this is really a great set of tracks here, and had so much variety in it. And to me, the reason it's probably higher than say No World for Tomorrow something is Second Stage Turbine Blade. In fact, this includes the Afterman. Is the variety in his vocals are just amazing. To have a song like Queen of the Dark and Black Sunday, and then have something that's much lighter like Toys. Not a big fan actually of Unheavenly Creatures or Old Flames. I prefer the sort of edgier songs of All on Fire and It Walks Among Us. That song, man, it just feels like it could just go right onto Good Apollo Volume 1. I freaking love those tracks. And The Gutter, of course, really cool. I don't know about the scream, although all these albums have sort of that weird like pterodactyl scream and sort of shouting that's here and there. I think I've become accustomed to it, so I do like that now. But it sounds maybe like I wanted to have maybe a deeper sounding scream, being someone that's more into metal. So sort of the high, almost like forced screams was a little bit of a turnoff, but they've been consistent enough for me to sort of accept it now. And then lastly, we got ourselves Vaxis Part 2 that just came out, and I think I probably will put it, I do think it's maybe my second favorite album from them. Again, I'm looking for variety in genre and like the dichotomy of his vocals with the background music, and just the range of genres is just so amazing. I think these kind of back to back are kind of interesting because Good Apollo Volume 1 is so consistent, and whereas Vax's 2 is it's almost inconsistent. Like you jump from one track to something that's just completely different, like just totally pop dance and like 80s, pop, and then you get something that's like dark and edgy, sort of progressive metal with ladders of supremacy. And then you start the album with the great, phenomenal intro with the Embers of Fire, and Beautiful Losers being just the most like quintessential Coheed song ever, catchy. But it is maybe a little bit, again, a little bit too light. It sounds very similar to like The Island, which I love that song, but it's not as edgy as I would like it to be. But it still has the lyrics that it's such a uplifting song. But then it's talking about like running before they spill your blood and whatnot, which and talk about beautiful losers is beautiful losers. It's again all this sort of contrast and themes and wordage, which I just find it very interesting. Of course, Rise is I think one of the greatest songs of all of Coheed that I've heard. It's super catchy, but then it's got the progressive sort of change up there. I actually did an edit of a few of these songs. I wasn't a fan of the auto tune, so I just did edits of them and posted it on my page here to get rid of the auto tune. That I can like the auto-tune voice. I heard people say it's a little outdated. And when I removed it, it didn't seem like it made much difference of the song. Like you were losing a few seconds of his vocals, but I'm like, well, I didn't really want to hear those vocals anyway. So that might be a little blasphemous to sort of edit this album to make it. I think maybe it might drop down somewhere around here or here without a couple of my edits. So same thing with the waking. Was it the waking of the window of the waking mind? Where I doubled up the vocals for it to have more of the Owl the Killer sort of sound during his sort of the transition to the angry moments about the doctors that have the alternative motives and stuff. That part, it seemed powerful, but it just didn't have the edge that I wanted. So I doubled up that vocal, and I added, instead of like him talking about Vaxis. Yeah, I just kind of removed those repetition and added the pterodactyl scream there. Or around that part to kind of break it up, and but with those subtle adjustments, I know again it's probably blasphemous, but that now as the album as a listen, I just think is really really good. I had initially taken out Bad Man. I'm like, no, hell no, this is a prize fighter song. But then I kept thinking of the song in my head, and then my wife and kid really liked it. And I'm like, all right, I'll put it back in. And I think that probably would happen with the auto tune as well. So maybe I'll come around eventually. But I think for now, as I'm easing into it, it's been a few months. I've been listening to the songs, daily. And I think they're pretty phenomenal. So I feel like it's going to last. I think I'm pretty confident in this, but you never know. The lasting power is one of the things that you're not quite sure of on these albums. So like Color Before the Sun, I thought was amazing, but I feel like, oh man, I over listened to that so much. I just feel like you can over listen to In Keeping Secrets and it will never get old. Whereas Color Before the Sun, it's like, okay, I've heard that one, enough, and they're not bad, but it's just the replay value. There's just not enough going on in that album, I think, to keep up the replay on that one. So that's probably why that one's dropped. Anyway, that is going to be the tier list, and again, I'll come revisit it after I rank each song, and I'll be posting the song rankings here momentarily. So that's all. Thanks.